Hello, thank you, Gall. I appreciate the introduction, and I also appreciate the opportunity to speak about FireEye Mandiant's vulnerability management program and how we perform intelligence-led remediation. But first, a little bit about me. My name is Matt Shelton. I actually work in a little bit different role than probably most of the FireEye Mandiant people that you run into. I actually work for the Chief Security Officer here at FireEye Mandiant, and I work on the internal security team. So we're protecting FireEye against the same threats that we help protect our customers from. I do roughly threat intelligence work, vulnerability management, and risk management within the internal security organization. I have about 20 years experience in information security. In past lives, I've worked for a large telecommunications company and also a global consulting firm. And of course, I've put my contact information there. If anyone has any questions, please hit me up. I'm always open for a good conversation with anyone. During the quarantine, I think I stopped wearing a suit, even though I have my headshot still has me in the suit. I think that might have actually been the last time I ever wore a suit. So I recently added a picture of me rock climbing to my slides as well. I'm very passionate about it. On the bottom right is me a few months ago climbing at Seneca Rocks in West Virginia. It's very exciting. All right. So one of the main challenges with vulnerability management is trying to understand the severity of vulnerabilities. Here at FireEye Mandiant, we love implementing new features in our products for our customers. We love creating new detections that can find evil at our customer sites. We love implementing new capabilities. What our engineering teams do not like doing is remediating vulnerabilities that are theoretical or are actual no real threat to the organization. So what my team is trying to do is we are trying to take all the vulnerabilities out there and try to distill them into a set of actionable vulnerabilities. Now, I actually took some data from our intelligence holdings and pulled out all of the CVEs that have been released in 2021. If you notice, there's over 19,000 different unique CVEs out there. But out of all those CVEs, there were only 217 CVEs that actually had real exploits attached to them. And out of those 217, less than half were actually easily exploited. So when we talk about vulnerability management and intelligence-driven remediation, what we want to do is try to understand what are those 217 exploitable vulnerabilities and what can we do to actually put real protections in place. Furthermore, I'd just like to point out of those 217 CVEs with exploits, we had a human analyst go through them and actually assess, how difficult they are to exploit, what is the consequence of exploitation, et cetera. And out of those, only 31 reached that high risk rating level. And out of that, only one is something that we considered critical. Now, if you imagine, there are, if we look at the CVSS score, there are, thousands that are highs and criticals, but we have a little bit different opinions. So we want to focus down and remediate the vulnerabilities that are most impactful so that our engineering teams can focus on adding value to our customers. Additionally, if we take an intelligence-led view of vulnerability management, we need to develop threat models around our infrastructure. Last year, I'm sure some of you remember FireEye Mandiant, we published research about a SolarWinds supply chain attack by a group that we call UNC 2452. The US government actually came out and attributed this to a Russian intelligence organization called SVR. And likewise, this group, UNC 2452, is the most sophisticated cyber actor we've ever investigated. Based on our intelligence reportings and help from our friends in the UK, and of course the cybersecurity advisory from the NSA, CIA, and FBI, if you notice, this group is only exploiting a small number of vulnerabilities. And out of this entire group, only 2 are from 2021. So as part of an intelligence-led vulnerability remediation approach, we want to focus on the impactful vulnerabilities, those like the ones used by UNC 2452. Overall, it's not just the Russian actors that are using this small number of vulnerabilities. It's also the Chinese state-sponsored actors. Here's an actual NSA cybersecurity advisory listing out the Chinese state-sponsored actors' vulnerabilities that are being used. This list is not nearly that large, and it's something that's a little bit more impactful than what we would just get from raw CVEs. But it's not just state-sponsored actors who are targeting our organizations. Ransomware has obviously become a crisis within our industry. If we use an intelligence-led approach to vulnerability management, we shouldn't just be looking at vulnerabilities with CVEs, but we should also be looking at vulnerabilities caused by misconfigurations, non-compliance to best practices, and credential abuse. UNC 2447 is a ransomware actor that we've been tracking for several months. They famously exploited a vulnerability in SonicWall VPN in order to establish a foothold into their victim networks. But that's not the only way they compromise their victims as well. They use lots of other ways to compromise victims. But on the right, I actually went into our intelligence holdings. I pulled out a listing of MITRE attack techniques that we've observed several different ransomware groups using. If you notice on the left column, exploit public-facing applications is just one of the techniques used by ransomware operators. If we do intelligence-led vulnerability management correctly, we can focus our finite resources not only on patching CVEs, but also looking at some of these other techniques, like, for example, external remote services and supply chain compromises, which I think is the big discussion here in 2021. I also found it interesting that out of several ransomware groups I reviewed, none of them were actually using vulnerability exploitation to move laterally across their victim organizations, victim networks. This is by no means a justification to not patch things inside. It's just we need to focus on the most impactful ways threat actors are targeting our organizations. Also, intelligence-led vulnerability management is not just about the exploitation of a resource, but also the remediation. A few weeks ago, there was a lot of discussion on this Microsoft Windows print spooler vulnerability. I'm sure a lot of you heard about it. It was just a few weeks ago, lots of discussion. We internally here at FireEye Mandiant found a proof of concept exploit on GitHub, and obviously we went to go test it in our labs. We found that the patches provided by Microsoft sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. I know this is kind of an eye chart, so I apologize, but I'd like to point out this chart that Will Dorman created and published to Twitter. It's actually a fantastic chart. It's basically an overcomplicated visualization depicting when a system is vulnerable and not vulnerable to CVE 2021-34527. Remediation should be a lot simpler. If the patch is installed, the vulnerability can no longer be exploited. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. So as defenders and managers of vulnerability remediation, should we be asking our systems administrators and DevOps engineers to go into firefighting mode when security is not even sure that a patch will fix the issue? So, as a takeaway, we need to use the vulnerability intelligence process to understand not just exploitation, but also remediation. And then also, I think it's incredibly important for an intelligence-led vulnerability management program to also understand that 0 days are real. When an announcement comes out about a 0 day, we have to go into immediate action. I published I put a couple of different reports on this slide that I think I found at least interesting. Mandiant Threat Intelligence on the left. Mandiant Threat Intelligence actually analyzed 95 vulnerabilities that were eventually exploited. And they actually found that 61% of those exploited vulnerabilities were exploited in 0 days. And more interesting in my mind is that we saw more 0 days exploited in the first quarter of 2021 than we have seen in the last 4 years. So there's definitely some sort of rise in 0 days out in the world, at least for this first quarter. Additionally, I think Google also corroborated some of this, some of our findings as well. On the right chart, they published a great report. I recommend everyone go take a look at it. But it basically came to the same conclusion as FireEye Mandiant. 2021 has seen a major uptick in 0 days. 0 days are on the rise, and we need to have a strategy on how to remediate those as quickly as we can. And that's where Vulcan comes into play. Here at FireEye Mandiant, we use Vulcan to sift through the noise and find those signals that we're looking for. Before we implemented Vulcan here at FireEye, we had several different repositories, all containing different types of telemetry about our vulnerabilities. With Vulcan, what we've been able to do is we've been able to consolidate all of that telemetry into one place and use it to identify the most impactful vulnerabilities here at this organization. This actually works out in everyone's favor. First off, my team is able to sleep better knowing that the vulnerabilities that we think are being exploited by bad guys or could potentially be exploited by bad guys are actually being remediated. And we also get the benefit of our system administrators and DevOps engineers are only focused on as minimal set of remediations as they need to work on. So in the next few slides, I'm actually going to walk through our process on how we do that. And the first step is to identify business stakeholders. So here at FireEye, we have a general manager model for all of our products and services. So I actually have an executive who I can go talk to, who's in charge of very specific products and services. Using Vulcan, we've actually created business units for each one of these general manager environments. Additionally, something that I would also like to point out is that we understand where our crown jewels are here at FireEye, and we've actually I have a list of crown jewels that we have very important data stored in it. We've also grouped our crown jewels into a business unit as well, and these business units are how we divide up all of the different groups so we can figure out who to task out when a meaningful and impactful vulnerability is actually published. And just to give you some examples, we have several products in the FireEye line, FireEye Helix, FireEye Email Security, Cloud HX. We also have several different services within the Mandiant line of services as well, such as our Mandiant Advantage, which is our intelligence offering, and then also Managed Defense. Those are all grouped into different business units. Underneath that, we've also grouped very specific systems into business units as well. So if we have a subcomponent underneath email security, we'll group that into a separate business unit as well. All right, and then the next step is to identify candidates for remediation. And this is actually where I like to spend the majority of my time, is trying to understand which vulnerabilities need to be escalated to our end users. And what I would recommend, at least, is to start out with a filter like the one I've set on this page. So exploitable. So there's an entire filter named exploitable in Vulcan. Go in there, set that to exploitable. I also like to track the status of the vulnerabilities. So there's a number of statuses like vulnerable, in progress, etc. So each month I can look at the SLAs for each of our remediation campaigns and start to develop campaigns for each of them. And I start with the exploitable vulnerabilities. In this case, we actually had 2 high vulnerabilities for this particular business unit. What we're going to do is, at least in our environment, is we focus on the critical and the high. Fortunately for this group, we didn't have any critical this month, but we focus on critical and high, and we are going to create a remediation campaign from this. So that leads me to the next slide. Is now that we have this remediation campaign, we can track to see when these vulnerabilities get remediated across our environment. Now, I'm actually pretty proud of this particular campaign, because 14 days and we had 100% success on this remediation. This is a great stat that you can report up to your product line's leadership about. So I'll take this type of number and go tell the general manager of that product line, look, you are doing fantastic. 100% success in May in only 14 days. Additionally, what I like about these remediation campaigns is there is a risk score here on the right. So if you notice, I can actually understand what the total risk to the organization was and what risk we've remediated based on this particular set of remediations. So the last thing that I'd like to point out, a very important part of our remediation strategy here at FireEye is Jira. I know I've blurred it out, and I apologize, but I did blur out the Jira ticket number, which is on the right. You'll notice is closed. My company, just like probably a lot of other companies, where we have an engineering culture and we live and die, for better or worse, by Jira. And so so none of our end users want to use Vulcan. None of our end users want to use any other tool. They just want to work their Jira ticket queues, and that's cool. I bring the work to them however they want it brought to them. And so using Vulcan, we can take all of this knowledge that we've created with our workflow, and we can direct it all at Jira, assign it out to end users, and they can go and implement it. And that leads to this very wonderful 100% success um, uh, remediation percentage, as you can see. All right. And so that's it. Well, thank you very much. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I love talking to new people, and I love meeting everyone in the industry. Please let me know. And I'd also just once again like to thank Vulcan for inviting me to speak, and also for playing a critical role in protecting our organization here at FireEye. So thank you very much. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you soon.